everyone, welcome to That's Cakeable. I'm Janine. Don't run away, it's just a cake. So a few months ago, my son had an obsession with a particular website called, what was that website called? I was gonna find out what the website was called. Exotic Animals for Sale Online. Thank you, darling.
Bye.
Yep, people buy them and keep them as pets. Although I must admit, I was completely blown away by that beautiful blue color and just could not comprehend how that happens in nature. Well, ever since, this one's been running around in my head, not literally, thank goodness. So this week, I'm going to show you how I created this cobalt blue tarantula. I hope you're not too arachnophobic and that you really enjoy this week's video. All right, I've got a 6-inch round vanilla cake that I've split in half, and I'm putting some ganache between those layers. To make it a little bit easier once it gets on the board, I'm using my original paper template, and I'm just gonna cut the general shape of that cake using the template. I'm placing a little bit of ganache on the backboard, and then I'm going to place my cake. I'm gonna start carving that out, making sure it's pretty rounded, so I'm using that baseboard as my guide, and sort of moving upwards. Now all those cake scraps that are coming off, make sure you save them, we're gonna need those. The shape we're going for is a little bit like a football, but then I guess that depends on where in the world you come from, right? I'm pretty sure those of you in the UK call soccer balls footballs, and we call them soccer balls, and they're round. That's not the shape we want, like a gridiron ball or a rugby ball. I hope that makes more sense. Now I ended up using 2 1-inch layers on the back. I'm only going to use one 1-inch layer on the front section. I'm doing the same with the front section, just carving that down, making sure it's slightly rounded. Okay, now I've got the general shape I'm happy with. I'm taking those cake scraps, adding some ganache and making some cake clay to finish this off. That's why you can't throw it out. Just add the cake clay to the cake using your diagram and get the general shape of the spider. The abdomen is quite bulbous on the top, cool word, and sort of tapers down in the front and in the back. For the head area, I'm actually making an indent all the way around the side of the head. Tarantulas tend to have, it almost looks like an armor plate on the top of the head, so make sure that you use your reference photo and try to get that down reasonably well at this stage. I'm looking at the cake from all angles just to make sure that we're reasonably symmetrical and it looks pretty good from every angle you're looking at it from. Plus, I've taken some cake clay and made sure that we made sort of a semi-attachment between the head and the body. You don't want it to look completely detached. Okay, to give this guy his first ganache coat, I made sure that I went in with really thin ganache because my cake was pretty soft and crumbly. That way, having the ganache nice and soft, we're not going to dredge crumbs up into the ganache too much. Once I had an initial coating on, I just started adding extra ganache and smoothing that out with both my spatula and my acetate smoother. I also ended up using a really small spatula to define that sort of armor plate on the front of the head that I was talking about, and made sure I didn't lose too much of that shape. Once he's all ganached, then just pop him aside and we can move on to the next part. Okay, now that the ganache has had time to set up, it's time to cover this baby. So I'm taking a 50-50 mix of fondant and modeling chocolate, and I'm just gonna tint it with some blue so we don't end up with patches later on if I miss spots or, you know. Now I'm gonna coat the cake with a bit of vegetable shortening. Now I take my modeling chocolate and fondant mix and I cover the spider. You want to cut off some excess, but make sure you've got enough just to slide a little bit underneath him. Now I'm not going to build up the underneath of him because spiders tend to be quite flat underneath. Now I want to smooth all of that out. And then using a sugar shaper tool, I'm just going to make little divots and very shallow holes where I want the legs to go. Now on the top of the head where that outer armor plate is that I was talking about earlier, they tend to have like a starburst shape right in the middle of their head. So I'm going to use some modeling tools to create that starburst shape. Okay, now we've got the awkward shape arachnid covered. It's time to start on the legs. So to create the legs, I've taken some of my 50/50 modeling chocolate and rolled it into like a snake shape. I then put one end into the hole we made earlier and then run it down the coinciding wire next to it. Slowly pinching and rubbing and smoothing down that leg until you've got it all the way down and it's reasonably smooth. Now don't make these legs too thin. They don't have thin, spindly legs like some spiders. They're quite thick. Where the leg meets that hole in that jointy, sockety section at the top, I am quite the biologist. Grab a chisel-shaped modeling tool and push upwards, making sort of like a socket area. I did this 3 or 4 times at the top of each of the legs. Once that's done, smooth it all out, and then it's time to start making the separations that appear in the actual spider's leg. So using your reference photo, figure out where the separation is, and then taking another pointed modeling tool, make some separation in that fondant. Once I've done that, I sort of just pushed both ends back together, keeping that separation line visible. Go ahead and do that for all the rest of the separations down the leg. And when I got to the bottom, I shaped a little foot, which was sort of like an eggy, ovally shape. Yes, they have feet. And did you know that tarantulas have paws? See, they're cute, only cute things have paws. And then you have finished off the leg. Of course, go ahead and do that with the other 7. Let's make the front feelers. Okay, so to make the front feelers, I'm using some armature wire. Now I'm keeping these quite long so that there's enough going into the cake to hold the weight of the 50/50 modeling chocolate and fondant mix. I cover those wires in some aluminium foil tape to make sure they are food safe. I then slightly bend them and then place them inside the front of the spider. Once again, like with the legs, I'm taking some of that 50/50 modeling chocolate and I'm going to wrap that around that wire. And the shape we're going for is sort of like an elongated teardrop. To make the front pincers, I've taken some modeling chocolate fondant mix and I have shaped it into sort of like a rounded triangle, which I know is completely contradictory because, you know, triangle, rounded. But anywho, that's sort of what it's like. Once again, the footage will show you exactly what I mean. Once I have the shape I want, I'm just taking a knife and I'm scoring that straight down the center, front and back. Now attach that to the front of the spider's head using a little bit of water so it doesn't fall off like mine started to. Front pincers, done. And the last thing we have to do before we get to color this bad boy is add the back feelers. To make the rear feelers, I've just taken 2 skewers and once again place them quite deeply into the back of the spider. I pop one on each side and then just like with the legs and the front pincers, I've taken some of that mixture and wrapped it around the skewer. It's sort of like a very thin tapered cone shape here. Blend that into the spider's buttocks. Then make sure they're sort of both pointing outwards opposite from each other. Like with the legs, the back feelers have some separations, so I've taken the same tool that I made those separations in the leg with and used that on the back feelers and made those separations there. Now, when I was thinking of how to color the spider, I wanted something that looked, well, spidery. So I researched a few ideas and I thought spiders do look a little bit suede. I found a lot of people use cocoa powder on vegetable shortening to create a suede effect on fondant. I thought, how can I get something that's like cocoa powder but blue to color the spider with? Magic, tapioca flour mixed with petal dust. So what I did was I tipped a good amount of tapioca flour onto a plate and I added some blue petal dust, 2 different color blues, and a bit of purple to make it pop. I mixed that all together really, really well, and you will need quite a bit because we got to load up this brush. I popped that aside and then I did the same with a little bit of black petal dust. With a large fluffy brush, coat the spider in a thin layer of vegetable shortening and then load up that brush with your first color and start dabbing it onto the spider. Now, of course, for the head, I'm following the marks that I've already made for where that starburst section is on that top plate. And there are black sections and blue sections, so following that guide, I'm just filling it in with color. Now, a word of warning, you will really need to load up the brush heavily with the powder. If you don't, it absorbs really quickly into the vegetable shortening and it'll just turn into a greasy, colourful mess. Just continue to do the same thing all over the spider, making sure that you take note of the colours that are in the reference photo. Okay, just a few more things to finish this beauty and then we are done. So cobalt blue tarantulas actually have 8 eyes, even though they've got really bad eyesight. But I decided to cheat a little bit and skip 6 of the eyes and focus mainly on the 2 main eyes and sort of cheat with a little bit of shading around the eyes to compensate for the other 6. So to make the eyes, I simply took some black fondant that I cut out with the end of a round piping tip, popped them onto the tarantula with a little bit of water, and then I sort of pressed them down to round them out a little bit. On the top of that, to make them all glistening and shiny, I added some confectioner's glaze, which bled a little bit, which is fine too. It actually added to the black that I wanted around the eye to compensate for the other 6 eyes. And then, like I said, I just added a little bit more black powder around the eye area, and that black shaded area now sort of compensates for the other 6 eyes that aren't on the tarantula. The last part I had to do is where the leg meets the body. That little joint is actually quite shiny and not really fluffy or furry. So I just took some blue gel color and painted over the top of those connecting areas, that little joint. And then once that was done, I also went over that with a little bit of confectioner's glaze just to make it a little more shiny. Cobalt blue tarantulas actually like to burrow, so for the board, I wanted to make it a bit earthy. I just crushed up some chocolate biscuits mixed with a little bit of brown sugar, and after coating my board in some piping gel, I just laid that around very carefully, pushing it in and under the spider with an angled spatula. I kept some of those chocolate biscuits a bit chunky to mimic pebbles and rocks. And that is it, guys. That's how you make a cobalt blue tarantula cake. And another fun fact, did you know that this lady is only a 2:1 scale? That's right, it's only double the size of the real deal. Not something I'd really want to run into. Well guys, I hope you really enjoyed watching this video and that you learned heaps and heaps. Remember that the template for this cake will be up on my website at that'scakeable.com. If you did like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so that you're informed every time I upload a new video. Okie dokie, I am off to add this gal to my animal cake playlist, which you can watch right here. And until I see you next time, you know the drill. Go and get your cake on. See you guys.